Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another message from the wilderness. Two cases in the United States have encouraged me to share my thoughts about due process, which is guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution. Due process ensures fair legal procedures and protects individuals from government actions that could deprive them of life, liberty, or property, ensuring fairness and preventing arbitrary actions. The first case involves a Canadian woman named Jasmine Mooney. Miss Mooney had been living in the U.S. off and on for several years, working in highly visible positions in Southern California, including as an actor. She had a U.S. work visa, but on one of her recent trips to the U.S., the validity of her visa was questioned. She described what happened to her after a U.S. ICE official accosted her in a San Diego facility on March 3, 2025. Here are some excerpts from her description. "A man approached me. 'Come with me,' he said. There was no explanation, no warning. He led me to a room, took my belongings from my hands, and ordered me to put my hands against the wall. A woman immediately began patting me down. The commands came rapid fire, one after another, too fast to process. They took my shoes and pulled out my shoelaces. 'What are you doing? What is happening?' I asked. 'You are being detained.' 'I don't understand. What does that mean? For how long?' 'I don't know.' That would be the response to nearly every question I would ask over the next 2 weeks. I don't know. They brought me downstairs for a series of interviews and medical questions, searched my bags, and told me I had to get rid of half my belongings because I couldn't take everything with me. 'Take everything with me where?' I asked. They handed me a mat and a folded-up sheet of aluminum foil. 'What is that?' 'Your blanket.' I don't understand. I was taken to a tiny freezing cement cell with bright fluorescent lights and a toilet. There were 5 other women lying on mats with aluminum sheets wrapped over them, looking like dead bodies. The guard locked the door behind me. For 2 days we remained in that cell, only leaving briefly for food. The lights never turned off. We never knew what time it was, and no one answered our questions. Then they moved me to another cell, this time with no mat or blanket. I sat on the freezing cement floor for hours. That's when I realized they were processing me into real jail, the Otay Mesa Detention Center. I was told to shower, given a jail uniform, fingerprinted, and interviewed. I begged for information. 'How long will I be here?' 'I don't know your case,' the man said. 'Could be days, could be weeks. But I'm telling you right now, you need to mentally prepare yourself for months.' Months? I felt like I was going to throw up. To put things into perspective, I had a Canadian passport, lawyers, resources, media attention, friends, family, and even politicians advocating for me. Yet I was still detained for nearly 2 weeks. Imagine what the system is like for every other person in there. A small group of us were transferred back to San Diego at 2 a.m. One last road trip, once again shackled in chains. I was then taken to the airport, where 2 officers were waiting for me. The media was there, so the officers snuck me in through the side door, trying to avoid anyone seeing me in restraints. I was beyond grateful that, at the very least, I didn't have to walk through the airport in chains. When I read Jasmine Mooney's case, I wondered how this could happen in the United States of America in our time. The other case I want to review with you today came to light on March 15, 2025, when the Trump administration sent 238 undocumented immigrants, originally from Venezuela, from the U.S. to an infamous prison in El Salvador, one the U.S. had recently funded. A U.S. federal judge, the Honorable James Boasberg, had ordered the plane to return to the U.S., as constitutional procedures had not been followed. This order was defied by the Trump administration, and the detainees were, in fact, incarcerated in the for-profit prison. This case highlights the rule of law as a fundamental principle of the U.S. governmental system, as well as separation of powers and an independent judiciary. Many legal scholars have said it represents an America that has moved beyond a constitutional crisis. Evidence substantiating the deported men's guilt has not been forthcoming. Many, including family members, maintain their innocence and describe the deportations as kidnappings. The men have indefinite sentences for alleged crimes for which they were never given the benefit of due process, as guaranteed in the Constitution. The U.S. legal system has always been structured to favor protecting the innocent rather than punishing the guilty. Benjamin Franklin argued that it is better that 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. His argument is consistent with legal development in the Western world at the time of U.S. independence. Recent studies have found that the majority of Americans strongly favor protecting the innocent, even if some guilty people remain unpunished. So how can we justify sending 238 men to indefinite incarceration without due process? We can't. Not if we want to be the beacons of freedom and human rights the U.S. has long been. Due process has been a priority in America since our founding, and with good reason. Many of us have ancestors who came from countries where due process was not available to most, including my ancestors from Denmark. At that time, a person living in Denmark, this was during the middle of the 19th century, could be arbitrarily punished by wealthy estate owners if they were in any way employed by them, with no recourse to public courts. Our immigrant ancestors knew we needed something more protective of life, liberty, and property than they had experienced elsewhere. Some of you may remember a famous case from March 5, 1770, where a squad of British soldiers fired on a crowd of civilians in Boston. 5 people were killed in what became known as the Boston Massacre. The soldiers and their captain were jailed, and a trial was planned. But who would defend them? Who would provide legal counsel when the vast majority in the area wanted swift vengeance? One account records, the day after the massacre, James Forrest, a loyalist merchant, approached lawyer John Adams on behalf of Captain Thomas Preston, who was to be tried separately from his soldiers. Forrest told Adams that Preston wished for counsel and could get none. Lawyers throughout Boston had refused to represent Preston or his soldiers. However, John Adams firmly believed that everyone had the right to a lawyer and a fair trial. So he willingly agreed to represent the soldiers, even if it meant risking his reputation. So John Adams, a lawyer who was one of the signers of our Declaration of Independence, defended British soldiers who had killed American colonists. The result of the trial was that Captain Thomas Preston was found innocent, as were 6 of the 8 soldiers. 2 were convicted of manslaughter. Had Adams not intervened with his love of truth and justice and respect for the rule of law, the outcome surely would have been much different. Can we find integrity like his today? A person like me, sharing messages from the wilderness, doesn't claim to be a legal expert. There are many facets involved in the emergence and application of due process that I will have to leave to those who have spent their professional careers studying the same. For people like me, we often turn to teachings we have long learned to trust for guidance. 2 passages from the Bible have offered me some grounding. The first is found in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. It reads, "But the stranger that dwelleth among you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." The ancient Hebrews were not afforded citizenship in Egypt when they served as slaves there for 400 years. I wonder if we reflect enough on what it would be like to be strangers when we callously punish the undocumented among us. The second passage is found in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 17. It reads, "Thou shalt not pervert the judgment of the stranger." Taken at face value, which I am inclined to do, I cannot reconcile this commandment with how we are currently treating undocumented immigrants. The Bible itself instructs us to provide fair and proper treatment, that is, due process. And that's good enough for this simple man. How often we have failed to provide due process in American history. If we had more time, we really ought to review the case of the 120,000 Japanese Americans who were forced into internment camps during World War II, though no evidence of criminal intent was ever provided. We really ought to review how Native Americans were denied due process and other civil rights for most of our history. Native Americans did not even become U.S. citizens until 1924, and full civil rights were not guaranteed until 1968. We really ought to review how Black Americans have suffered through innumerable inexcusable lapses of due process and other civil rights, conflicts that are not entirely finished to this day. I may be able to address some of these in more detail in future messages. I'd like to end with a personal story about the rights of people within U.S. jurisdiction who do not have full citizenship status. When I was in college, I had a roommate who was from Colombia. We lived in a house with 8 other college students. He and I had a good relationship, so it wasn't surprising that I'd noticed how distressed he suddenly became, though he was at first reluctant to talk to me about his problems. Almost every evening for over a week, he would get a phone call. As he struggled to communicate in English to the person on the other end of the line, I could tell that something serious was happening. I asked him about this. With trepidation, he told me that in one of his classes, a young lady said she had left her engagement ring on her desk. Class ended, she walked out of class and realized she had left it behind. She went back and it was gone. She accused my friend of stealing it, as he was the last person she saw in the room. This young lady's fiancé began calling my friend every night, threatening him. He said if he didn't give the ring back or pay for its value, he would have him deported. My friend was terrified. He had sacrificed everything to study in the U.S., and his family, especially his mother, would have been crushed if he was sent back. He didn't have the money to pay for the allegedly stolen ring. He didn't know anything about the U.S. legal system, and he had nowhere to turn. At the time, I was taking a business law class. I told him I was no expert in the law, but I did know enough to challenge the caller. I told him the next time he called, he should put me on the line. This happened the very next night. When I got on the line with the accuser, I pulled out every legal term I could think of and told him that what he was doing was illegal. I told him that if he continued, I would help my friend sue him for defamation and extortion. I told him that if he called again, he had better have a lawyer. Well, he never called again. And wouldn't you know it, my friend told me that the supposedly stolen ring was located. The young lady had lost it, according to their story, and was embarrassed to tell her fiancé, so she had blamed my friend. My friend's gratitude for my intervention, humble and uninformed as it was immense. He said his mother cried when she heard what I had done. He said as long as he lived, he would always remember me. That happened about 40 years ago. In emphasizing that the American system of due process and civil rights belongs to all mankind, including the strangers among us, I'm not suggesting that we do away with laws. That would, in fact, negate the need for due process. However, how we enforce our laws, how we treat those who may have been guilty of something procedural, tells us a great deal about our humanity, about our ethical maturity, and for some of us, about our level of discipleship to the divine. What we're seeing now at the federal level is beneath our privileges and responsibilities. And I want us to do better. Until next time, I want to wish you all the best from the wilderness.